Wealthy man disrespects black judge in court, but her shocking sentence leaves him speechless. In a packed courtroom, everyone stood when the judge entered. Everyone except one man, Alexander Caldwell. He stayed seated, legs crossed, phone to his ear, speaking loudly about stock prices like he owned the building. In his eyes, he did. Rules didn't apply to him. Courtrooms were just stages where he paid for the script and picked the ending. But today, he wasn't the one holding the pen. And in that one moment, by refusing to rise for the judge, he made the biggest mistake of his life. The air inside courtroom 237 felt heavy. Reporters lined the back, whispering into recorders. 24 people filled the public benches, some victims, some curious, some angry. They had all come to see if justice could still stand tall against a man who had spent 30 years standing on everyone else. Judge Anthony Carter walked in wearing simple black robes. His steps were steady, his eyes were calm, but those who knew him knew better. Behind that calm was a man forged by fire. He stood at the bench but didn't sit. His voice rang out, "Mr. Caldwell, in this courtroom, we rise when the judge enters." The room turned to look at the man still seated. Alexander Caldwell didn't move. He ended his phone call slowly, like he was bored, then looked up with a small smile. "My apologies," he said, drawing out each word like it was beneath him. "I was handling business. Very important business." Carter didn't blink. "Is it more important than showing respect to this court?" "That depends on your definition of respect and of importance." Whispers filled the courtroom. Even his own attorney looked uncomfortable. Finally, Caldwell stood, slowly, dramatically, like it was his choice. "Thank you," Judge Carter said, sitting. "You may now be seated." With that, the trial began. Elena Cruz, the lead prosecutor, adjusted her files. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed focused. She had worked months for this case, years even, and she knew what they were up against. Caldwell wasn't just rich, he was connected. His name was like a shadow that moved through city halls, police stations, even the mayor's office. He had stolen millions, not just from the government, but from people. Retired teachers, old factory workers, single parents, entire neighborhoods, robbed through fake charities and rigged projects. He wore expensive suits, but beneath them was a man who had destroyed lives. Elena began to read the charges aloud: tax fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, but Caldwell didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair and smiled like it was a school play, and he already knew the ending. But Judge Carter was watching closely. He saw everything, every smirk, every eye roll, every little performance, because this wasn't Carter's first time dealing with men like Caldwell. He had grown up in the toughest parts of Southside Chicago. His mother cleaned houses during the day and worked at a nursing home at night just to put food on the table. Carter had studied by candlelight. He had walked to school with holes in his shoes, and he had spent his entire life proving that dignity didn't come with a price tag. That's why he was here, on this bench, wearing these robes, to remind men like Caldwell that justice could not be bought. But just 20 minutes into the hearing, a folded note arrived on the bench. Carter read it silently. "Watch your back. Caldwell owns half the police department. Evidence disappears fast in his cases." Carter said nothing, just slid the note under his folder. He'd suspected this, and he knew if this case was going to hold, it couldn't just be about facts. It had to be about truth. It had to be airtight, and it had to survive the storm. Across the courtroom, Caldwell leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something. She looked startled, then nodded. Whatever plan he was setting in motion, it had already begun. But Carter had faced storms before. He had stood in courtrooms where the truth was so buried, people forgot what it looked like. And still, he found a way to bring it back into the light. This time, He would do it again, and this time, the whole city would be watching. Because when power meets principle, only one walks out stronger. And in this courtroom, the judge wasn't for sale. By the second day of trial, people weren't just attending out of curiosity. They were watching with hope. Hope that, for once, money wouldn't win. But in the marble hallways just outside courtroom 237, hope was whispering. And fear was answering back. Elena Cruz had been a prosecutor for 8 years. But nothing had prepared her for this. Not just the scale of the crime, but the pressure, the silence, the eyes. The night before, someone had followed her home. She didn't stop driving, just kept going in circles until the car behind her turned away. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. When she arrived that morning, there was a message slipped under her door. No signature, just 3 words written in ink. "You're not safe." She showed the note to security, but they shrugged. No cameras on that side. Could have been anyone, of course, just like always. People like Caldwell didn't threaten with fists. They used shadows, and silence, and fear, and just enough money to make cameras malfunction. Inside the courtroom, he was calm. Too calm. He sat there in his perfect navy blue suit, tapping notes to his lawyer, occasionally glancing at the gallery like he was choosing furniture. Elena hated that look. It wasn't arrogance, it was ownership. The look of a man who believed the world already belonged to him. But something shifted when the first witness was called, a financial auditor from the Department of Urban Development. Young, nervous, voice shaking, she began to testify about a grant that was supposed to fund low-income housing in the East Side. The money vanished before the first brick was laid, but Caldwell's name showed up on the expense accounts. Elena leaned in. This was good. Very good, until the witness suddenly asked for water. Then her voice cracked. Then she asked to stop. Carter's voice was gentle. "Do you feel threatened, Ms. Patel?" She hesitated. Her lips trembled. I don't feel safe anymore." Carter nodded. "Take a moment. We'll reconvene shortly." As the courtroom emptied for recess, Elena felt her stomach twist. One witness down. And not because she was lying, but because fear had already touched her door. In the hallway, she ran into Judge Carter. He didn't speak right away. Just watched the reporters swarming around Caldwell's entourage like bees around a sugar jar. "Then," he said quietly, "they're not just after this case. They want to make an example out of you." Elena swallowed hard. "I know." "You still in?" "I have to be." Judge Carter gave her a slight nod. "Then build it brick by brick. Don't rush. Don't guess. And don't trust anyone who smiles too easily." Back in chambers, Carter poured himself tea. A habit from his mother. When life felt too heavy, she'd boil water. She always said, "Let it steep. Some truths take time." He remembered those words now as he looked at a second note slipped onto his desk. "Evidence will disappear next. Ask about locker number 42. It was unsigned again. Carter stared at it for a moment. Then he called someone he trusted, a junior officer named Sullivan. Young, sharp, unbought. That afternoon, Officer Sullivan checked the evidence locker. The chain of custody logs were off. 3 signatures missing. A security camera had gone. Black for exactly 13 minutes. 13 minutes. Just enough time. Carter didn't tell anyone. Not yet. He couldn't. Not until he knew how deep it went. But the hallway whispers were getting louder now. Another juror received a strange package. A scholarship brochure for her daughter, with a handwritten note attached. "Vote wisely. Her future depends on it." She turned it in immediately. Inside the courtroom, Judge Carter kept his tone steady, kept the trial moving forward, but the cracks were spreading. And Caldwell? He smiled. He sat there as if the world was just doing what it always did, folding for him. But he didn't see what Carter saw. He didn't see the security guard in the hallway, now taking extra notes. He didn't see the bailiff whisper something urgent to the prosecutor before court resumed. He didn't notice the junior officer slipping a folder into Carter's chambers when no one was watching. Because the rich man was too busy watching the front of the house, thinking the show was his to direct. He forgot the real stories, the ones that matter, are always being written in the background. The truth was still gathering its strength. And justice was just getting started. The trial had entered its third day, and already the cracks were showing, just not where Caldwell expected. He had walked into this courthouse believing it was just another deal, another transaction, another room where his name and wealth would carry more weight than truth. But something had changed. Not in him. He was still smug, still slow smiling, still wearing $1,000 suits like armor. No, the change was in the room, in the people, in the silence that surrounded every witness who hesitated, every guard who stood a little stiffer, every juror who now looked over their shoulder before walking to their car. And in Judge Carter, that morning, Carter didn't even glance at Caldwell when he entered. He simply sat, adjusted his glasses, and nodded to the clerk to begin. But behind his eyes, something had shifted. Less patience, more preparation, because the warning signs weren't just whispers now. They were loud. Officer Sullivan returned, that morning with news about the locker. 3 items were gone. All 3 directly linked to Caldwell's financial trail. No cameras, no signatures, no explanations. Carter didn't show his anger. He'd learned long ago that in a broken system, rage burns out faster than resolve, so he simply documented it. Quietly. Carefully. Meanwhile, Elena Cruz stood in front of the courtroom with a bundle of new files. Her voice was stronger today. Her hands no longer trembled. The threats hadn't stopped, but neither had she. Today's witness was different. Margaret. She was in her late 50s, sharp eyes, plain clothes, and the quiet dignity of someone who had lost everything and still found the strength to stand. She had worked at Caldwell Enterprises for 17 years. Her testimony was simple at first: budgets, payroll, transfers. But then, she started to describe the special accounts. Some payments came in with no record. Others went out without any clear purpose. One day I asked about it, and Mr. Caldwell called it creative accounting. Elena leaned in. And when you pressed further? Margaret's voice cracked. I was told to stop asking questions. And when I didn't, my son was pulled over 3 times in 1 week. No tickets, just warnings. The courtroom fell silent. Caldwell shifted in his seat for the first time all morning. Then Margaret added something no one expected. I made copies. Elena blinked. Excuse me? Margaret opened her handbag and held up a flash drive. I never stopped documenting. I knew this day might come. From the defense table, Caldwell's lawyer went pale. Carter leaned forward. Do you have reason to believe this evidence is authentic and untampered? Yes, Your Honor, Margaret said. I mailed a backup. Copy to my sister last week. Out of state. She's ready to bring it if needed. A murmur rippled through the room. Caldwell looked furious. He whispered something sharp to his lawyer. She didn't respond. Elena plugged in the drive. The courtroom watched as spreadsheets filled the screens. Money flowing through shell companies, donations to fake charities, suspicious purchases from public accounts. This wasn't just theft. It was a blueprint for how to break a city without ever touching a single brick. Can you confirm these entries, Ms. Cruz? Carter asked. I've reviewed these records before, Your Honor. These are the same accounts we traced in our investigation. Only now we have the internal logs. Outside the courthouse, news was already spreading. Inside, Caldwell was cracking. His eye. Foot tapped. His hands clenched. He stopped looking at the jury. because he finally understood. This wasn't just about courtroom performance. It wasn't about charm or control or playing the victim on national news. This was real, and the armor he had worn for decades, his wealth, his name, his power, was starting to fall apart under the simplest of tools: evidence, courage, and persistence. During recess, Carter returned to his chambers and found a small envelope waiting. Inside, a photo, his wife on her morning walk. His grandson getting into the car for school. No message, no return address, just the image. The message didn't need words, but Carter, as always, didn't panic. He made a call to the FBI. Quiet, efficient. Then he locked the photo in his drawer and returned to the courtroom without a flicker of emotion. Because if Caldwell thought he could scare this judge, he didn't know who he was dealing with. Judge Anthony Carter had lived through worse than threats. He had survived systems designed to make him disappear. He had clawed his way from forgotten corners of the city to sit where truth could finally speak. He had made a promise to himself, to his mother, to every soul who'd been crushed by people like Caldwell. And he would not break it now. Not for fear. Not for pressure. Not for anyone. Especially not for the man sitting smug at the defense table whose cracks were starting to show. And tomorrow, the cracks would deepen. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. It wasn't just the media trucks now circling the block like vultures, or the protesters with hand-painted signs reading, "Justice can't be bought," or even the police standing a little taller near the courtroom entrance. It was something else, a sense that the story was about to turn. Inside courtroom 237, Elena Cruz sat at the prosecution table, flipping through documents that were all ready, starting to feel like weapons, quiet ones, but powerful. She had Margaret's flash drive backed up twice, hidden in different places. Her witness list was thinning, but those who remained were done whispering. And then it happened. The side doors opened and a woman walked in, not hurried, not afraid, but calm, controlled, as if she was the one running the show. She wore a gray suit, elegant but not flashy, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her steps quiet but deliberate. She didn't look left or right. She looked straight ahead and went directly to Judge Carter's chambers. A few minutes later, the bailiff returned and whispered something into Carter's ear. The judge paused, then nodded. Court went into a brief recess. The gallery buzzed with questions. Who was she? 15 minutes later, Judge Carter returned. So did the woman. And this time, she didn't take a seat. She walked to the witness stand. Elena stood, stunned. "State your name for the record," the woman's voice was firm. "Claire Caldwell. I am Alexander Caldwell's sister." The room exploded in shocked whispers. Alexander Caldwell didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. He leaned back slowly. In his chair, lips pressed tight, eyes narrowed. His sister had come to testify against him. Elena was speechless for half a beat. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Why are you here?" Claire didn't hesitate. "Because someone has to stop him. Because I've been watching him destroy people for decades. And I'm done staying silent." Judge Carter watched closely. So did the jurors. So did the cameras. Locked in on a moment nobody saw coming. Claire pulled a small laptop from her bag. "I've been recording conversations in our family home. The library, the wine cellar, his private office. They're all common use areas. I have the legal right to access them, and I have over 3 years' worth of audio and video." Alexander's attorney stood up fast. "Your Honor, we object. This is a clear violation of privacy. This evidence was gathered legally," Claire cut in. "Every file has a timestamp. I also brought notarized statements from our family attorney confirming joint ownership of the property. It's admissible." Judge Carter turned to Elena. "Have you reviewed the material?" "I've begun to, Your Honor. she said. And if even half of what's in here is true, this isn't just financial crime. It's organized corruption, Claire continued. My brother doesn't believe laws apply to him. He calls judges temporary roadblocks. He once told me the only difference between a crime and a deal was the size of the check. She took a breath. I stayed quiet because I was scared. And yes, because I was ashamed. He's my brother. He paid for my education. He gave me a job in the company. But over time, I realized the money wasn't generosity. It was control. Elena showed the court a sample of the recordings. The audio played through the courtroom speakers. Alexander's voice filled the room. If the accountant talks, handle it. Intimidation, arrest, whatever it takes. No paper trail. The gallery was silent. Another clip began. That reporter? The one who poked around my Cayman accounts? He's in a hospital now, isn't he? That's how you end stories. Carter looked over at Caldwell. For once, the man didn't smile. The jurors stared at him differently now, not like a powerful man or a successful businessman, but like a dangerous stranger. Elena asked Claire one more question. What changed? Why now? Claire looked toward her brother, then away. Because one night I heard him talking about a new project. He was laughing, saying he'd found a way to push low-income families out of their homes, just so he could build luxury condos. He said the city would approve it in days, because he already owned the people who mattered. She paused. And then he said something I'll never forget. Morality doesn't build empires. Money does. That was the moment, she said. The final break. Carter thanked her for her courage. Elena looked over at Caldwell, expecting him to be shaken. But instead, he leaned forward, spoke for the first time all morning. Nice performance, Claire, he said softly. I hope it was worth it. Claire met his gaze. I didn't come here to hurt you, Alex, she replied. I came to stop you. There's a difference. As the court recessed for the day, the air was thick with realization. The empire was cracking. Not just because of prosecutors. Not just because of evidence, but because the people who once helped build it were finally tearing it down, and tomorrow the world would hear even more. Because Claire Caldwell had only played the first tape. That night, Elena Cruz didn't go home. She stayed in her office, alone, curtains drawn, door locked. The lights were off, except for a single desk lamp, and the silence was louder than ever. Claire Caldwell's testimony had shaken the courtroom, yes, but it had also awakened something darker. The messages came quickly after the session ended. One was left on Elena's windshield. Your family sleeps where you park your car. Think about that. Another was slipped under her door. Photos of her walking her little brother to school last week. No names, just images and silence. By morning, federal agents were posted outside her apartment. They didn't say much, just watched, guarded, waited. Because everyone now understood, the trial wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. Who held it? Who could keep it? And who was willing to lose everything to see it fall? When Judge Carter arrived at the courthouse, he didn't park in his usual spot. Instead, he was driven in a secure vehicle, escorted by federal marshals who now stayed by his side, quiet men with sharp eyes and no time for small talk. Because something had changed. The threats had crossed a line. Carter's wife, Michelle, called him that morning in tears. Someone had knocked on their front door at 3 a.m., waited silently, then left a red envelope. Inside was a single photograph of their grandson, Tommy, at baseball practice. Taken from less than 10 feet away. Carter didn't tell anyone in the courtroom. He didn't let it show on his face. But when he stepped into courtroom 237 that morning, there was steel in his voice that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just judging a man now. He was standing between that man and everything he loved, and he wasn't moving. Inside, Claire returned to the witness stand. Today, she brought more. Audio files, ledger sheets, emails between her brother and city officials, some of whom were now trying to deny they even knew him. The documents showed a network of favors: judges, officers, contractors, inspectors. It wasn't just a company, it was a system, a machine. And Alexander Caldwell had been its engine. The defense tried to object, but the damage was done. Then, a sudden interruption, a loud buzz at the courtroom door. A bailiff rushed in and whispered something urgently to Judge Carter. He called a short recess, face unreadable. In chambers, a federal agent showed him the footage. Detective Whitman, Caldwell's longtime enforcer, had just been caught on camera, trying to enter the federal evidence room, disguised, unauthorized. Carrying what looked like lighter fluid, he was arrested on the spot. "Seems like someone's running out of moves," the agent muttered. Carter didn't answer. He just picked up his pen and made a note in his file. The game wasn't over, but the board had shifted. That afternoon, a surprise witness stepped forward: Thomas Bradford, the accountant who had gone silent after threats to his family. He returned, escorted by federal protection, hands trembling, but eyes focused. "I've been afraid for too long," he said. "But people are standing up now. I want to be one of them." He testified that Caldwell ran over 40 offshore accounts, most tied to fake nonprofit organizations. The money had come from government programs, public housing funds, even a relief grant after a local flood. Families had gone homeless. Seniors had lost pensions. And Caldwell had bought himself a yacht. When asked why he came back, Bradford's answer was simple: "Because when my son grows up, I want him to know his father didn't stay silent." That night, a fire broke out in the evidence storage room at Elena's office building. Sprinklers kicked in just in time. But not before several documents were burned, including one folder Elena hadn't yet backed up. She stared at the ash-stained cabinet for a long time, then picked up the phone. "Activate full federal protection," she told the agent. "Witnesses, staff, myself." Then she walked to her window, looked out at the dark sky, and said softly, "He's cornered now, and he's trying to burn the truth before it reaches the light." Back in court the next morning, Claire returned for a final piece of testimony. She played one more clip, this one secret, old, and crystal clear. It was Caldwell laughing with city officials about a children's hospital they'd secretly demolished, so he could build a high-rise condo with river views. "Progress," he had said on the tape. "Sometimes the little people have to lose so the big people can win." The courtroom was stone silent. One juror, a mother of 3, wiped a tear from her cheek. Judge Carter let the silence hang for a few extra seconds. Let it sink in. Because moments like this weren't just about law. They were about humanity, truth, and the kind of justice that didn't come from pages, but from people willing to risk everything to protect it. The courtroom was no longer just a room. It was a battleground, and for the first time in decades, the side fighting for justice was winning. The morning didn't begin with sunlight. It began with sirens. 3 unmarked federal vehicles sped through downtown, sirens off, but lights flashing. Inside one of them sat Detective Whitman, handcuffed, finally quiet after years of arrogance. He had spent the entire night in a federal holding cell, refusing to speak. But this morning, something had changed. A new arrest, a new betrayal. And now, Whitman was ready to talk. In his confession, recorded just before sunrise, he listed names, real names, judges, officers, real estate officials, even 2 state senators, and, at the center of it all, Alexander Caldwell, the man who had called himself a builder, a leader, a visionary. But Whitman called him something else, a puppet master, who never touched the strings directly. He just paid others to pull them. By 8:30 a.m., that confession was in Judge Carter's hands. He read the transcript slowly, each line confirming what he already knew in his bones. This trial was never just about money. It was about control, about how far one man could twist the law before the law twisted back. Inside courtroom 237, the mood had shifted. Again. But this time, it wasn't fear or silence. It was focus. The jurors had stopped taking nervous glances toward the gallery. The witnesses no longer whispered during breaks. Even the reporters, usually scattered and restless, were sitting up straighter now. Everyone could feel it. The walls were closing in. And Caldwell, he felt it too. His suit was still sharp, but the shoulders hung a little looser. His eyes darted more often. His lawyer, the fourth in 3 weeks, sat quietly, flipping pages, already planning her exit. Then Claire took the stand again, not as a witness, but to deliver records the FBI had uncovered the night before. They found them hidden behind a false wall in Caldwell's private estate library. A temperature-controlled vault filled with blackmail material. Photos, recordings, contracts signed under pressure. Videos of secret meetings in private clubs. Dozens of envelopes with names and amounts. One folder was labeled insurance, in case the judge gets bold. Another, Elena, her brother's school schedule. When Elena saw it, her hands clenched. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words, because now the evidence was speaking for her. Later that day, Margaret Wilson returned to the witness box. The former accountant was no longer afraid. She brought a reconstructed ledger, rebuilt from memory, matched against offshore wire logs provided by Claire's files. She traced money from pension funds, meant for retired factory workers, all the way to Caldwell's Family Foundation, which turned out to be a shell company with no staff, no offices, no purpose beyond hiding stolen wealth. Elena stood beside a large screen, showing red arrows from fake charities to private accounts. He didn't just steal from taxpayers, she said. He stole trust, the kind of trust people have in hospitals, in schools, in the justice system. She turned toward the jury. Mr. Caldwell treated the law like a menu. He ordered what he wanted, he tipped whoever delivered it, and he threw out what didn't serve him. Caldwell didn't smile. For the first time, he wasn't wearing confidence. He was wearing fear. Outside the courthouse, news vans tripled in number. Protesters chanted for full transparency. Victims of Caldwell's schemes began appearing on camera, sharing their stories. A retired teacher who lost her pension and couldn't afford heart surgery. A mother of 3 who had to move when her subsidized housing disappeared overnight, sold illegally to one of Caldwell's fake development arms. Caldwell Enterprises, once a glowing symbol of success, was now under full federal audit. Its new CEO had stepped down. Investors were jumping ship. Share prices collapsed, and the name Caldwell now trended online next to one word: corruption. But that night, inside a secured government building, another betrayal was unfolding. Victoria Holt, the attorney who had once fought fiercely to protect Caldwell, handed over a private flash drive to federal agents. Inside, recorded conversations with Caldwell in which he urged her to fabricate evidence against Judge Carter, and even draft a fake harassment claim against Elena Cruz. "I can't do this anymore," Victoria told agents. "He thinks laws don't exist for him, and people like me are just tools." Back in her hotel room, she wrote a resignation letter to the state bar. Then she called her father, a retired public defender, and cried for the first time in years. "I lost my way," she told him, "but I think I finally found it again." In night chambers, Judge Carter finished reading Whitman's full confession. Then he turned to the newest report. 3 jurors had received fresh intimidation attempts, envelopes of cash left anonymously on their car seats. Carter stood quietly, walked to the window and looked out. The city lights blinked like stars trapped under glass. He had spent his whole life believing justice was worth defending. But tonight, that belief wasn't an idea anymore. It was a burden, heavy, constant, dangerous. Still, he knew this. Some things are worth carrying. The next morning, he walked into courtroom 237 with a sealed envelope in his hand. The bailiff opened the court. The jury entered, and Alexander Caldwell looked up. He didn't smile, because he had seen enough to know. This wasn't his court anymore. This wasn't his city. This was the fall, and it was far from over. It started with silence. Not the kind that fills a courtroom before a verdict. This was deeper. The kind of silence that comes after truth has done its work. When the shouting stops, the power fades, and there's nothing left but accountability. Courtroom 237 was full, packed in fact, victims, reporters, federal agents, ordinary citizens, and a long line of jurors who had faced weeks of pressure, fear, and bribery, and still stood firm. At the front sat Judge Anthony Carter, holding a sealed verdict envelope. To his right was Elena Cruz, worn but steady, her eyes fixed on the 12. People who now held history in their hands. And across the room, seated in a wrinkled gray suit with no lawyer by his side, was Alexander Caldwell. For the first time, he looked like what he had always been behind the designer suits and polished words, a man who had lost everything. The jury forewoman stood. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of millions of stolen dollars, destroyed lives, and a city nearly sold to greed. On the count of federal tax fraud, guilty. On the count of embezzlement, guilty. On the count of witness tampering, guilty. On the count of organized racketeering, public fund theft, conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. 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 27 charges. 27 guilty verdicts. Each one felt like a stone being laid, not on Caldwell's shoulders, but in the foundation of something new. Caldwell didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just stared forward, mouth tight, hands folded neatly in his lap like he was still in control, though the entire courtroom knew the truth. That control was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Judge Carter nodded slowly and stood. He didn't look at Caldwell when he spoke. He looked at the city. Before this court delivers its sentence, I want to say this. He placed the envelope aside and folded his hands. This case was never just about one man. It was about the idea that there are some people so powerful, so wealthy, so connected, that the law bends to them. He glanced at the victims in the gallery, some crying quietly, others clutching each other's hands. I want every citizen in this courtroom to understand. Justice is not a favor. It is not for sale. It is not a negotiation. He turned, finally, toward Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, you treated the law like a business partner. You used the courts like chess pieces. You turned suffering into profits and dared to believe there would never be a reckoning. He paused. Well, here it is. A bailiff stepped forward, handing Carter the final sentencing report. This court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Additionally, all assets gained through criminal means are to be seized and redistributed through a federally supervised restitution fund to compensate victims and rebuild affected communities. Gasps echoed through the gallery. A woman in the third row wept. An older man, one of Caldwell's pension fraud victims, stood silently, tears in his eyes. Caldwell remained seated, only his breathing changed. Slower, heavier. Like a man finally realizing there would be no escape. As marshals stepped forward, he stood on his own. No shouting, no threats. Just a glance at his sister, Claire, who sat near the back of the courtroom, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. He didn't say a word to her, but she did. As he walked past her, shackles on his wrists, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You could have done something good with it." He didn't turn, because he knew she was right. Outside the courthouse, thousands had gathered. Some held signs that read, "Justice is possible." Others brought candles. Many held up photos of loved ones, retired workers, laid-off teachers, hospital patients, those who had been quietly crushed under Caldwell's empire, and when the news broke that the verdict was guilty. And the sentence was 35 years. The crowd didn't cheer. They exhaled, the kind of breath a city holds when it's been scared too long. Weeks later, reforms began. The FBI launched sweeping investigations into other corrupt city contracts. 3. More judges stepped down. 15 officers were placed under review. Caldwell Enterprises was dissolved. Its assets liquidated. Its name erased, and from its ashes rose something new. A public trust fund, overseen by Elena Cruz and Claire Caldwell, to help rebuild communities destroyed by the very man who once claimed to own them. They called it the Restoration Fund. As for Judge Carter, he declined an offer for a federal bench promotion. "I belong here," he told reporters. "This city needs to see that justice isn't just handed down from Washington. It lives here, in these streets, in these people." One day, months later, he stood outside a brand new children's clinic, built where a burned-down hospital had once stood. A small plaque near the door read, "For those who stood when others sat." Carter touched it lightly and smiled, because justice had been done, and for once, it had stayed done. Final voiceover call to action for your YouTube script. If this story moved you, if you believe no one should be above the law, tap that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in justice. And drop a comment below. I believe in truth. Let's flood the algorithm with hope, because stories like this, they're not just about what happened. They're about what can happen when we refuse to stay silent.